It all started with Laura, a young foreign woman, and her bright-eyed little girl, Betty. They had traveled far, through unfamiliar lands and endless roads, searching for a place they could finally call home. Laura's journey wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. She had fled her homeland with nothing but hope in her heart and Betty's small hand in hers. Their days were long, their nights often cold and restless. Laura carried herself with quiet resilience, though her body ached and her spirit was tested at every turn. Her worn clothes and bare feet revealed the hardships she'd endured, but her determination to give Betty a better life never wavered. She had no passport, no papers, only her daughter, her love, and a dream of finding safety. Wherever they went, they faced suspicion and unkindness, but occasionally, someone would offer a small act of kindness, a bit of food, directions to the next village, or a smile that reminded her she wasn't invisible. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in rich shades of orange and gold, Laura and Betty reached the edge of a quiet village surrounded by green fields. For a moment, as they stood there bathed in the warm light of the sunset, Laura let herself hope. Maybe this was the place they'd finally find peace. But what Laura couldn't know was that this village, which looked so tranquil under the fading sun, held dangers she couldn't foresee. Among its residents was a man named Otima. He seemed powerful, even charismatic, but beneath the surface, he was someone without conscience, a predator disguised as a protector. Laura's strength had carried her through so much, but the meeting with Otima would test her in ways she'd never imagined. And the love that fueled her journey would now be her greatest weapon in the battle ahead. As the golden hues of sunset deepened into the cool blues of twilight, Laura and Betty walked along the narrow dirt path toward the village. The evening air was crisp, rustling gently through the trees and carrying the distant sounds of children laughing and women singing as they prepared dinner over crackling fires. For the first time in what felt like days, Laura allowed herself to breathe. Just for a moment. Betty's laughter broke the quiet, light and free, as she darted after a group of fireflies flitting in the dimming light. Laura watched her daughter, a small smile tugging at her lips, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long while: hope. Maybe they could find a way to rest here, even if just for a night. But the moment didn't last. Out of the shadows stepped Otima, a man whose very presence seemed to darken the air. He was dressed in a police officer's uniform, the badge and attire meant to inspire trust and authority. But to those who knew him, Otima was anything but honorable. Behind the uniform was a man consumed by greed, driven by a corrupt need for power, and always on the lookout for someone vulnerable to exploit. His tall, broad figure loomed as he moved closer, boots crunching on the dirt path, sending up small puffs of dust with every deliberate step. His eyes gleamed, sharp and predatory. "You there," he barked, his voice cutting through the serene evening like a whip. "Where are your papers?" Laura froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Instinctively, she pulled Betty close, shielding her with one arm. Her voice wavered as she replied, I don't have them. We're just passing through. Please, we mean no harm." Otima's lips curled into a sneer. He stepped closer, his shadow stretching over them. "No papers," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Then you're a threat. You'll come with me to the station." Before Laura could protest, his hand clamped around her arm, rough and unyielding. She gasped in pain, trying to twist away, but his grip was firm. "Please," she cried. "We're just looking for safety. My daughter." But Otima wasn't listening. He pulled her along, ignoring Betty's tearful pleas as she clung to Laura's other hand. The little girl's cries echoed into the night, mingling with the flicker of fading fireflies and the fading warmth of what had once felt like hope. Instead of leading them to the safety of the police station, Otima steered Laura and Betty off the main road and into the dense, tangled undergrowth of the bush. The path grew narrower with every step, the trees closing in as twisted branches stretched out like claws against the dim sky. The air seemed heavier here, oppressive, and with each step, Laura's unease grew. Her heart raced as the realization dawned. Something was very wrong. Otima's grip on her arm was firm, almost bruising, and every attempt to slow down or resist was met with a harsh tug. "Where are we going?" Laura demanded, her voice trembling, barely masking the fear that gripped her. Otima didn't even look at her. His answer came in a cold, detached tone that sent a shiver down her spine. "You'll find out soon enough." Betty, clutching her mother's hand tightly, let out a small whimper, her little legs stumbling as she struggled to keep up. Laura squeezed her daughter's hand, trying to reassure her, though her own fear was threatening to overwhelm her. The bush grew thicker, darker. It felt as though the very forest was swallowing them whole. When they finally stopped in a secluded clearing, the oppressive silence was broken only by the rustling of leaves and the pounding of Laura's heartbeat. Otima turned, and the malice in his eyes made her blood run cold. In that instant, the full weight of his intentions crashed down on her. She pleaded with him, desperation spilling from her lips. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking under the weight of her terror. "Not in front of my daughter. Please, have mercy." But Otima's face betrayed no compassion, no humanity. He dismissed her cries as if they were nothing more than noise, his focus chillingly unbroken. Betty clung to her mother, her wide, frightened eyes reflecting the horror she didn't yet fully understand. When it was over, the clearing felt like a graveyard. The stars above seemed to dim, as if even they couldn't bear to witness what had happened. Laura collapsed to her knees, pulling Betty into her arms and holding her close. "It's okay, my love," she whispered through her tears, her voice shaking. "We'll get through this. We'll survive." Her words felt hollow, but they were all she had left to offer. In the darkness of the bush, Laura clung to her daughter, vowing silently that they would find a way to endure, no matter how broken they felt now. The night felt endless, a cruel stretch of time marked by Laura's quiet sobs and Betty's trembling whispers. The forest that had seemed almost alive earlier now felt suffocating, its shadows closing in around them. Laura sat on the cold ground, holding Betty close. She gently rocked her daughter, murmuring soft reassurances despite the ache in her body and the weight on her soul. "Mama," Betty's small voice broke the silence, hesitant yet piercing. "Why did he hurt you?" The question hit Laura like a blow. She froze, her throat tightening, words failing her. How could she explain something so incomprehensible to her little girl? After a long moment, she found her voice, though it wavered with grief. "Some people," she began, her tone gentle but firm, "carry darkness in their hearts. They hurt others because they've lost their way." She paused, stroking Betty's hair. "But we're stronger than that. We'll rise above this, my love. Always." The words were for Betty, but Laura repeated them in her mind like a mantra, willing herself to believe them. Deep down, she felt a spark, a growing resolve to not let this define them. When dawn broke, painting the forest in soft golds and pinks, Laura knew what she had to do. Though her body was weak and her spirit battered, she held Betty's hand tightly and began the long walk back to the village. By the time they arrived, word of their return had spread. Villagers gathered, their murmurs a mix of curiosity, concern, and simmering anger. Laura stood in the center of the crowd, her disheveled appearance and haunted eyes silencing even the most skeptical. With Betty at her side, clutching her hand tightly, Laura began to speak. Her voice, though hoarse, carried strength. She told the villagers everything, how Otima had led them into the bush, what he had done, and how he had betrayed the very trust his position demanded. The crowd listened in stunned silence. Mothers held their children closer, and men clenched their fists in outrage. For too long, Otima's abuses had been whispered about but never confronted. Laura's bravery lit a fire in their hearts, and soon, anger rippled through the crowd like a tide. The village elders, revered for their wisdom and fairness, convened an emergency meeting under the ancient baobab tree at the heart of the village. The people gathered around, their faces etched with determination. Otima was summoned to answer for his crimes. He arrived in his uniform, his posture stiff and his face a mask of defiance, but his eyes betrayed the fear lurking beneath. Laura stood tall despite her pain, her voice steady as she recounted the night's events in vivid detail. She spoke of Otima's betrayal and cruelty, her words cutting through the air with precision. When she faltered, Betty's tearful voice filled the gaps, her innocent recollections bringing the truth home in a way that no one could ignore. The elders deliberated for hours, listening to Laura's testimony and the stories of others who, emboldened by her courage, came forward to share their own experiences of Otima's abuse of power. By midday, the verdict was clear. Before the gathered village, Otima was stripped of his uniform. His badge, once a symbol of trust, was cast to the ground in disgrace. The elders pronounced his sentence, life in prison, ensuring he could never harm anyone again. But the punishment didn't end there. The elders declared that Otima's story would become part of the village's history, a cautionary tale to be told for generations. It would serve as a reminder of the devastating cost of abusing power and the strength it takes to stand against it. As the crowd dispersed, Laura knelt beside Betty, hugging her tightly. She whispered, "We did it, my love. We're going to be okay." And for the first time in a long while, Laura felt the truth in her own words. In the weeks that followed, the village came together to support Laura and Betty. They built a small home for them near the river, where the water sang a soothing melody and the land was fertile with promise. The women of the village taught Laura their traditions, while the men ensured her safety. Betty, though scarred by the past, found solace in the laughter of other children and the love of the community. Through it all, Laura never lost her spirit. She became a beacon of hope and resilience, her strength inspiring others to stand against injustice. And as the seasons changed, her story became a part of the village's lore, a tale of suffering turned into strength, of darkness overcome by light. The moral of this story is clear. Power is a responsibility, not a privilege. To abuse it is to sow seeds of destruction, but to wield it with integrity is to build a legacy of honor. And no matter how deep the wounds of the past, healing is possible when a community stands together in love and solidarity.